Okay, I'm Dr. Victoria Dunckley. I am an integrative child psychiatrist, and integrative practitioners look at lifestyle factors both to optimize treatment and also to reduce the need for pharmaceutical medication. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been really focused on restricting electronics use in children because I find that out of all the lifestyle interventions, it provides the most dramatic benefits by far and away. So I'm just going to go over kind of what's going on right now with kids and some of the symptoms that are caused by screen time and the physiology of what actually happens when kids use electronics. So just to clarify, these are effects that are above and beyond the radiation effects. And also I tend to focus more on interactive screen time, so things like video gaming, internet use, anytime kids are interacting with a device, smartphones, iPads. Okay, so currently there's several disturbing trends that are on the rise in children. For psychiatric disorders, there's been an increase in ADHD, autism has exploded, tics, Tourette syndrome, bipolar disorder, all of those are on the rise, or at least diagnosis of them. At the same time, more and more kids are being put on medication, particularly stimulants, which are used for attention, and antipsychotics, which are used for all sorts of things, including tics, mood swings, sleep problems, autism. And the antipsychotics have serious short-term and long-term side effects. So that's particularly disturbing. So also at the same time, there's increase in obesity, high blood pressure, other medical conditions that we didn't used to see in kids at all. Disability filings for psychological, psychiatric, and neurological conditions. And then there's also some drops in IQ and achievement measures that we're seeing, particularly in boys. So boys are really falling off the curve, and currently in colleges right now, it's a 2-to-1 ratio of women to men. So meanwhile, while all this is going on, kids' electronics use has skyrocketed, and this is not a surprise to anybody. Currently, it's at 5 to 7 hours a day for the average child. Exposure is occurring at increasingly younger ages, including toddlers and even babies. And now school is getting into the game. So aside from homework, they're using interactive whiteboards, and they're also using software to teach. So what do we already know about the screen time risk? Well, we actually know quite a lot. We know that screen time is associated with medical conditions, mental health issues, sleep problems, social problems, delinquency, addiction, both tech addiction and other addictions, as well as learning problems and developmental issues. So that begs the question, why aren't we more strict about how much exposure children are getting? The reason is because there's a lot of misconceptions that are perpetuated in our society about electronics use. So there's a lot of myths, and these are actually not the myths, but I'm going to go over the truths, the facts. First, total screen time is a much better predictor of problems than the type. So content doesn't matter as much as people say. So a lot of people are focused on whether the content is educational or violent or not. That doesn't matter as much as the amount of screen time. Interactive screen time is actually more problematic than passive screen time like television. So that's another myth, because a lot of parents will restrict television viewing, but they'll let their kid use the iPad as much as they want. But interactive screen time is actually more addicting. It's more likely to cause sleep issues, behavior problems, and mood problems. So another issue is that the everything in moderation mentality doesn't always apply. So some kids can't tolerate any screen time. I work with a lot of kids who are on the autism spectrum, as well as ADHD, and some of them, they have 15 minutes of iPad use and they're already dysregulated. So everything in moderation, we can't always assume that's true. In school, studies show that computer skills are overemphasized, but they're actually relatively easy to learn, even for kids with disabilities. So there's no reason why we should be spending so much time teaching them. Software education, there's no evidence that it's superior to any other types of learning. So it's at best neutral, and it's probably harmful. And an example is electronic reading. So studies show that when reading from a screen actually hinders literacy, so it hinders kids' ability or learning how to read, and also their reading comprehension. And that's actually true for adults too. They don't read as the comprehension is impaired when you read from a screen. So another example is taking notes by hand is actually superior to taking notes with a laptop, and that's true for memory, integrating the material, and even exam performance. So in general, the nature of technology itself is at odds with basic developmental needs. So kids need eye contact, they need face-to-face conversation with adults, they need movement, and they need exposure to the outdoors and nature. And those are all the things that are getting reduced by technology in the classroom. So one way to think about screen time is that anything with a screen, it acts like a stimulant. So a stimulant being things like caffeine, cocaine, amphetamines, those are all stimulants. And we know kids can't tolerate caffeine, especially if they have any kind of vulnerability. So if you just think of it as a nervous system irritant, so that means all screen time, including educational, actually stresses the nervous system. And every time a kid picks up a screen, they actually go into a little bit of fight or flight each time. So that just ends up just regulating the nervous system. So if we look at the different factors that actually cause this fight or flight state, there's multiple things that induce it. So the first is that reward pathways get activated. And these are pathways that are meant to be activated to a small extent normally, but if they're activated repeatedly, they actually become desensitized. And the main brain chemical that's involved in these pathways, dopamine, is also gets out of balance. So sometimes there's some evidence that dopamine doesn't work as well, or it's overactive in some areas and less active in others, and that might be the root of a lot of the problems. The sensory system gets overloaded, so visually the colors on a screen are much brighter, more vivid. There's usually more movement. So all that rapid and intense sensory stimulation increases stress. The light from the screen tends to be blue-toned or white, and it's unnaturally bright, so that increases stress levels and also suppresses melatonin, which is what we need to sleep. So only just a little bit of screen stimulation for kids especially suppresses their melatonin for hours. Multitasking goes hand in hand with electronics use. So kids are multitasking when they're Skyping and doing their homework, but it's also happening at school. And that actually depletes mental reserves, and it impairs performance, and it impairs their attention over time as well. And then the interactivity itself actually stimulates, causes hyperarousal in and of itself. And then, of course, radiation. Radiation causes stress at the cellular level as well as the systemic level. So how do all those stress reactions turn into symptoms? Well, when the brain is stressed and overstimulated, what happens is the blood flow becomes shunted from the front part of the brain or the higher thinking parts of the brain to the more primitive parts of the brain. The body clock becomes desynchronized. Brain chemistry and hormones are all altered. Anyway, so you can see when kids start operating from a more primitive part of the brain and the frontal lobe is suppressed, everything the frontal lobe does suffers. So the frontal lobe controls emotional regulation. It controls executive function, so attention, getting things done. It controls impulse control, empathy, and creativity. So when the child becomes overstimulated, they tend to have problems with mood, cognition, and behavior. So their mood, they become dysregulated, they're irritable, they can't calm down if they're mad. They tend to have meltdowns over little things, so you can see them having meltdowns on the playground, at home. Cognitively, they have poor focus, they can't get their act together. Even if they do their homework, they forget to turn it in. and parents complain that they, have trouble getting ready for school or getting ready for bed. And then in some kids, they actually can become psychotic. I've worked with multiple children that have become paranoid or actually start hallucinating from using screens, and it actually goes away when you get rid of them. So, and behaviorally, they tend to be they become defiant because they just, they can't think. They can't control themselves, and they have low empathy, so they misread social cues and things like that. So all sorts of problems. So you can see if all of these frontal lobe functions are suffering, you can see how virtually any kind of psychiatric or neurological disorder can be either mimicked or exacerbated. So some kids, when you remove electronics, everything goes away, and other kids, they still have the disorder, but it's much better. So what's happening is kids are getting misdiagnosed, they're being inappropriately medicated, and the cost of that is that we're misusing resources. So both in the mental health and in the educational realms, we're struggling already in these realms, and these are expensive problems to treat, so it doesn't make any sense to use them inefficiently. Okay, so in contrast, if you restrict electronics, all of those things, we have the opposite effect. So what I do with every single child I see, the first time I see them is I put them on a strict, extended 3 to 4 week electronic fast. So all interactive screen time, I eliminate. I let them, they can watch a little bit of TV, but everything else is not allowed. And that helps them, it helps reset the nervous system, so their brain is allowed to rest for several weeks, and everything resets. So stress levels lower, their brain chemistry rebalances, and hormones, including stress hormones, are better regulated. So what this does is it clarifies the diagnosis. It optimizes other treatments. So sometimes the child's been in therapy and it hasn't been working. All of a sudden it starts working. Or they're getting tutoring in math or something, and all of a sudden their tutoring starts to progress. At the same time, it minimizes the need for medication, so even if a child does need medication, the dose will be lower. And it also provides a baseline for how much they can tolerate. So every kid will have like a tipping point where they start to become dysregulated and everything kind of goes out of whack. But once they're reset, then you can really systematically determine how much they can tolerate. So if parents reintroduce anything, I have them do it very slowly and methodically. So I'm going to go over a couple cases. The first is Sophia. She's a 15-year-old girl with autism and ADHD. She was stable for several years on 2 different medications. One of them was just as needed for agitation. So she came in recently and had gained 12 pounds in 3 months. And she was shrieking, hitting her mom, hitting herself in the head, crying, and I hadn't seen her like that since I first saw her years before. So what happened? So during the session, the mother actually handed her smartphone, and I asked the mother, "How long have you been giving her that?" And she just said, "For a couple months." And I said, "Why?" Because this is a family that didn't allow video games, and she said the reason she was allowing it was because Sophia was using the iPad at school, so she thought it was okay. So it turned out that the iPad program at school had also started a couple months earlier. So then we figured out that the weight gain was actually because the mother was giving her more medication because she was more agitated. So you can see how these problems snowball. So we had the mother eliminate the smartphone use. That reduced the symptoms, and then we worked with the school to actually stop the iPad program, which is harder to do than you might think, but they eventually worked with us. And once we did that, her symptoms resolved, and she actually lost the weight. Another case is Ryan. At the time, he was 8 years old. He was a good student, no mental health symptoms, but all of a sudden in 2nd grade, his grades started falling. He became depressed. He stopped being interested in learning anything, and his teachers were complaining. So his mother took him to several psychiatrists and therapists. He first got diagnosed with ADHD, then depression, and then finally with autism because they couldn't figure out what was going on. He was prescribed multiple medications, and he was receiving services at home and at school, and he still wasn't getting better. This is just a colleague of mine, by the way, her son. So when I spoke to the mother, Ryan had been playing video games daily, and she had been given, he had been given a smartphone 1 year before. So I told her to try the fast, the electronic fast. She did it for 4 weeks, and Ryan's mood improved. He started playing with his friends again. He started sleeping better. His grades went up, and he was back to himself. So the mother was so impressed that she continued to restrict video games, or didn't allow them, and didn't allow him to have a phone either. So that was 2 years ago. So 2 years later, he's still doing well. He's not on any medication, no services, happy child. So you can see this is a child that really didn't have anything wrong with him, but ended up looking quite ill. And this kind of a case happens all the time. So the recommendations are really that we just need to pace technology, introducing technology to kids based on developmental needs and not what we think they should know, and also individual needs. So some children just can't tolerate it. So if we do that, we actually protect their frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is what helps them use technology in a healthy way in the first place. So ironically, reducing exposure now will help them use it more productively later. We need to be able to use these fast. It's a free, easy, effective thing to do. And then we can reintroduce slowly as tolerated. If we use wired-only access for internet access, that automatically reduces accessibility, and obviously it reduces radiation as well. And then for school, we really need to, parents need to be allowed to opt their children out of iPad and laptop programs, and ask for other tech-related accommodations, such as not having light at night, which is the research on light at night is terrifying. So I always encourage parents to ask for accommodations. Even if they don't get them, the more times that parents ask, the more likely eventually it'll be easier for everybody to ask. So I wrote Reset Your Child's Brain to explain the science better, and also to give more guidance in managing screen time systematically. And there's a flyer over there. The book you can pre-order it now, but it'll be released on July 21st. So thank you very much for your attention.
Crianza y abundancia.